Hello, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. We are just going to wait for a few minutes for everybody to join the call. So good afternoon from London, but good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I know we have people coming in from all over the world for this webinar today. And welcome to our webinar, which is all about how government payments can better reach and serve vulnerable groups. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum. They're a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And also, I'd like to thank our knowledge partner for today, which is Visa. So in terms of today's topic, one of the most important things that governments do is to protect their nation's most vulnerable people, including through benefits payments. But many government disbursement systems really struggle to meet the needs of all of their users, often failing to be accessible, for example, to individuals who don't have bank accounts, to those who lack formal identity documents, or other hard-to-reach groups. So in this webinar, we're going to look at how governments can improve their payment systems to meet some of these challenges. And we'll cover things like how different payment models, such as prepaid cards or direct digital payments, can help governments to reach vulnerable groups, how modern payment programs can reduce the threshold for financial competence and improve financial inclusion, and how technology can join up welfare and benefit systems so that support can be more responsive to the citizens' needs. We have four fantastic speakers with us here today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce our speakers and ask them to give some opening comments. But this webinar is also about you, our great audience, and we'd like to get through as many of your questions as we can before the end of the webinar. So whichever device you are using, you should see probably at the bottom of the screen that there is a Q&A function, a button. Please do use that Q&A button at any point from now on to send in your questions or your comments, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar. So let me just introduce our panel today. First, we will hear from Antonio Manzi, who is the National Director of Transfers and Data Analysis at the Ministry of Social Development in Uruguay, where he is in charge of managing monetary transfer programs for socio-economically vulnerable households. His directorate also monitors and evaluates the ministry's social programs, providing data analysis services on their performance. And during the pandemic, Antonio's team was in charge of designing and implementing an emergency transfer program, which was channeled through publicly owned mobile app, becoming the first ever digital payment delivery mechanism for cash transfers in Uruguay. Then we will hear from Mark Palmer, who's the Vice President for Europe at Visa Government Solutions. And Mark has led Visa's public sector team in Europe since April 2022, helping governments across the region to digitize revenue collection, disbursements, and commercial payments. And Mark has 35 years of experience in the technology industry across public sector markets and led government digital transformation solutions for Google Cloud and IBM over 2 decades. Then we head over to Latvia, where we'll hear from Dina Buza, who is Deputy Director for Financial Market Policy and Head of the Credit Institution and Payment Services Division at the Ministry of Finance in Latvia. Dina has 15 years experience across innovation, financial engineering instruments, and SME support programs. And for the past 8 years, she has focused on the development of financial sector regulation, including banking sector regulation, resolution, payment services, and fintech policy. And last but by no means least, we'll hear from Ketal Long, who is a Senior Research Fellow for Development and Public Finance at the Overseas Development Institute, so the ODI, where he co-leads the Digital Public Finance Hub. His other main area of interest is local government financing for service delivery. He also provides advice and technical assistance on public financial management reform to governments and their development partners through ODI's advisory services. And prior to joining ODI, he was an ODI fellow in the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development in Swaziland. So I'm sure you'll agree with me, we really do have a great panel with us here today. As I say, please take this opportunity to send in your questions and we will get through those before the end of the webinar. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Antonio, over to you, Antonio, to give us your opening remarks.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to Global Government Forum, and to Siobhan, Raquel, and all the team for organizing this forum. And also, it's great to be sharing with such a high level panel of speakers. So it's my pleasure to share some thoughts with you guys. I'll put my time because I know we have 5 minutes to do the introduction, and just briefly mention that as Siobhan said at the introduction, we here in Uruguay, we used to have a hybrid model of cash transfer payments pointed at vulnerable households. We had one part that is mostly they use cash. People, the beneficiaries, receive the cash and spend it as they wish. And the most vulnerable, they have prepaid debit cards, which are limited in the kinds of commerces that they can use the card, mostly with food or cleaning device things and stuff like that. So that was the system of cash transfers. But during the pandemic, we had to focus on a new challenge, which was incorporating new populations that have been that were not included in these programs, either because perhaps they didn't have people underage in their houses, or they were not structurally poor, but they were informal and they lost their job. So there was no policy that was pointed at them. So we had to quickly go and reach out with some sort of cash transfer, and that's where the digital wallet payments comes in. And we had to create something that was quick, that was contactless, or at least that reduced as much contact as possible, because it seems so long ago, but if you remember, we couldn't even say hello or anything. So we had to reduce that, and we carried out a whole system where the person only had to enter through a digital form, a web form, put their ID, their government ID, and we would check everything on our systems to determine if they were eligible or not. And if they were, they would receive a link directly to their phone where they could download the digital wallet, and from there they would receive a monthly payment to use in different enterprises. So that was a very good example of responding very quickly. We reached about 320,000 people at the peak time. It's like 10% of the population, and we transferred more than 5 million coupons to access food and different stuff. So that was a good example that we wanted to continue. But as happened in other countries, as the pandemic started closing and the different special programs were being left out, we had the use of the mobile app started falling, and we started reverting to the old methods of cash and prepaid card. And from our side, it was much more efficient to maintain a digital mobile payment because it has several advantages. For example, it's safer for the people, it's quicker to receive the money, you make sure that cash is kept within the formal sector. That's another thing. And the other advantages that we saw is that you have the cell phone number of the families. We have the characteristic over here that most vulnerable people change their phone quite a lot. And with this system, you make sure that where they're receiving the benefit, you have the updated phone number. And that allows us to communicate directly with a beneficiary to, for example, tell them if there's a new social program or if there are any change in the rule or anything. So that's another thing that I see as a great advantage. I direct channel to the beneficiaries and also more transparent, so because you can show them what they're receiving. You have more flexibility on how to tailor the cash transfer for different needs. Unfortunately, we have not been very successful on trying to get beneficiaries to leave the cash and switch to the mobile app. We've planted some incentives, such as the exoneration of value-added tax for all the purchases made through the digital app, but we've found some resistance to switching over to that. But I think we can perhaps I can leave that for the questions, and because I know I'm running out of time. But definitely we've learned a lot. We are visualizing going all through the mobile app as food transfers, subsidies for different energy or water or anything like that, to have everything centralized in that digital payment wallet. That's our goal, and hopefully we can make the changes necessary for that to happen. But I think I can leave it through there and then answer all the questions you can have.
Antonio, thank you so much. That's a perfect way to start, because I think you've set out that kind of progression that you had. So as you say, before the pandemic, you were using a mix of kind of cash transfers and then prepaid cards, but that kind of specified how the money could be used. Then during COVID, you had to respond really quickly, and you came up with a very successful digital wallet payment system, which allowed you to respond very quickly post-pandemic. And I think a lot of the audience will kind of resonate with this. There's a tendency to revert back to old ways of doing things. And as you said, a lot of the benefits of digital there, you can be safer, you can be speedier, you can have that better contact with the citizen. And I definitely will pick up on the things you said around why is there this resistance to kind of digital? Why are people still holding on to cash? That would be quite interesting to follow up on. And then, as you say, that digital wallet could then be used, that technology, to bring in other services. So really interesting way to set the scene. Thanks, Antonio. Mark, coming over to you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Lovely to be here this afternoon. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. So I'm sure that everyone on this call has heard of Visa, but probably some of you are not aware that we're actually a payments technology company. You will get a card from your bank or issuer. We provide a lot of the technology behind those cards, managing the network, looking for fraud, making sure the payments are valid. But we provide a lot of other technologies as well. And my job in particular is to provide those technologies to governments and the public sector, specifically in Europe. But I have colleagues around the world who perform the same function as me. I mean, essentially, we look at money that governments accept from citizens and businesses, maybe fees or fines or taxes, even touch and go open loop city transit networks like we have here in London. We look at governments who are spending their own money on things like procurement, commercial payments. And then last but not least, and particularly important here, is around disbursements. And we've implemented a very large number of disbursement programs all around the world, including here in Europe. And those range from delivering grants and loans to SMBs or even farmers, distributing state pensions, delivering welfare or social protection like we're really talking about here, payments for the vulnerable, and also global humanitarian aid disbursements around the world. First, let me very quickly perhaps summarize what, in our experience at least, some of the key challenges that we see in serving vulnerable groups, such as the elderly. They might be sick, they might be in poverty or homeless, or unfortunately we see in Europe a lot of asylum seekers as well. First, we believe that reducing the barriers to receiving payments and really simplifying the experience is probably the priority, the most important aspect of successful disbursements to the vulnerable. We believe also, however, in choice and access. So we often say in Visa, so as no one is left behind. Cash may form part of that disbursements package, but clearly what we are promoting and believe in our experience, is digitizing the disbursements processes. We see that an increase in the social impact with financial enablement tools is particularly important. I'll come on to that perhaps in the Q&A later. And then we also see that digitizing disbursements makes the better use of public resources by improving efficiency and policy alignment. And then last but not least, we believe that implementing disbursements digitally can help government agencies address fraud and error. There are a few challenges to consider with traditional payment methods like checks or vouchers or even bank transfers, which can include things like uncertainty and delays, the lack of visibility of certainty when funds may arrive, for example. This can be slow in the case of an emergency crisis, and there's also potential for increased fraud risk. There's an administrative cost and time involved in those approaches, some level of inconvenience, in particular for the beneficiary and also the unbanked, which I'll talk about in a moment. And not all beneficiaries do want funds in a bank account. So it's important to consider all options, particularly for this group. The reach and impact is really important here. It might be a challenge to identify eligible beneficiaries, for example, or indeed how we ensure that funds are used as intended. And there's typically a lack of communication with recipients. So successful disbursements often rely on a well-designed digital disbursement solution. And this is really provided to reduce barriers and simplify the processes for the citizen, first of all. And I would say, Siobhan, to sum up, we see three critical success factors. First, to identity, ideally digital identity for eligible assessment. But otherwise, a government know your citizen or KYC process, of course. The second point is around provision of mobile information to increase awareness and particularly boost participation for this target group in the program that's available from the government. And then to provide a scalable payments infrastructure. And that really delivers reach, impact, convenience, and of course, reliability. Of course, I should say a little bit about the kind of solutions that we have. And we have a number of different solutions at Visa. Of course, cards, you would expect, prepaid cards. They have an obvious application for the unbanked, such as asylum seekers. They're trusted, get immediate payments, can avoid cash, which can be expensive and open to misuse. You can provide a platform to manage those cards. And they are increasingly virtual cards on a mobile phone with digital credentials. Not so much these days, bits of plastic, but of course we can provide both approaches. Interestingly, you can also add spend controls to define what or where the recipient spends the funds. And some governments are interested in that ability to control the spend. So they offer a simplicity, they're reloadable, and they're isolated from the recipient's other accounts. And finally, and this is an important point, these digital technologies can also offer some insights to government entities to help inform the policy as well as control fraud. And we've got examples of that for asylum seekers in Germany, as well as Finland, for payments to asylum seekers. Some governments choose to use debit cards, like in the Netherlands. There's a Legal Guardians program, which is particularly interesting in this context. For individuals who are considered in the eyes of the law to be incapable of independently managing their finances and require support and ongoing care to get them on a path to do so. And these legal guardians assist these individuals by taking control of their finances. And this is done via a card and a platform to manage that and gives them the payment tools as well and training. As well as cards, we have a completely different kind of technology called Visa Direct, which is used actually extensively by commercial organizations such as PayPal or Airbnb, even transport companies for compensation payments. The interesting thing about this technology is that it's capable of sending money to almost anywhere in the world, to nearly 9 billion different bank accounts, wallets like Apple or Google Pay, or cards of any sort. So it has immense reach, immense speed and security. And we're seeing a lot of interest, in particular from humanitarian aid agencies in this technology. But it can also be used for other government disbursements, such as state pensions to overseas recipients. The final technology I'm going to touch on is something called open banking, which we have here in Visa, a product called Tink. This is being looked at for recipient eligibility checks in more traditional settings like bank accounts, where this technology can do account and income checks by getting information through one API. And a lot of governments, the UK one included, as well as many others around Europe, are looking at this for eligibility checks across welfare systems. So finally, if I just wrap up here, I mean, we believe that the implementation of a well-designed digital disbursement solution does better reach and serve vulnerable groups, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the next hour or so. We see that it generally reduces barriers and simplifies processes for the citizens. It's important that no one is left behind, however, and so in some instances, this might be combined, as I said earlier, with the provision of cash or other disbursement means, for example. So, Siobhan?
Mark, thank you so much. Interesting. I mean, you echoed, I think, some of what Antonio said there in terms of some of the challenges, I think, around simplifying the experience to make it easy for people, beneficiaries, to be part of the programs. Providing choice, you said they're really important. So some people might want cash, but some people might not. Helping to increase financial inclusion as well by getting people onto some of the programs. But some of the benefits as well, making government systems more efficient, and you can address fraud and error as well in the systems if you've got the technology right. Again, you also mentioning you have to consider the unbanked as well. I think that's a theme we'll probably pick up in the questions. And then you mentioned 3 things in particular. So either having a unique digital ID for your beneficiaries, or at least the government having some way of knowing the citizen, increasing awareness of the programs to boost inclusion, and then having a scalable solution. And then really interesting to hear about some of the solutions that Visa provide for the public sector. So the prepaid cards, like Antonio said, some of those you can specify how they're used so you know where the money is going. Also, you mentioned data there and how you can get lots of data from this technology and the insights you can drive policy development. Some of the other things, the Visa Direct being used to send money all across the world, and then open banking as well, which I think I'm going to come over to Dina. I think open banking is also used, some of the technology in Latvia. But thanks so much, Mark. Now I'm coming over to Dina. Over to you, Dina.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for possibility to speak about such an interesting subject as payments to the most vulnerable groups, and how to expand the world of the digital payments, which is, I think, the future of the payments. We are becoming more digital in our digital payments. In Latvia, 87% of the payments are in digital format. Of course, we are not starting from the scratch. We are building on our current infrastructure, but a very big motivation to innovate and to make all these changes to the digital payments was, of course, the European Union regulation, the retail payment strategy, of course, the payment accounts directive, which was previously already designed for everyone to have the bank account with the basic features, including the refugees, including students, including elderly people, including refugees. And other vulnerable groups. So we are building on these building blocks, and we know that these building blocks are for the benefit and for the serving of the people. Now we have the infrastructure, the payments infrastructure, the public infrastructure, also the state treasury for payments is using the instant payments, so for incoming and also outgoing payments. That means that everyone can reach their benefit payments within 10 seconds. It is very convenient, and we know that we also were one of the first countries which introduced the instant payments already before the approval of the instant payment regulation of the European Union. And we also have the payment link register, where you can send a link to the mobile phone, and you can also request the payment through this mobile link. Saying that, we are even more increasing the road towards this digital payments with all the benefits which were received by a lot of people, especially these transfers which were made through the state benefit payments during the COVID times. In particular, also to the natural persons and also to the enterprises. For this, we were using the infrastructure which is for the State Revenue Service, and our State Revenue Service is also having a very advanced technology for making the refunds on the taxes. So the personal income tax and also the management of the corporate income tax as well. And yes, I can say that we are trying to build even more on these different solutions using the opportunities which are provided by the European Union regulation. There are also experimenting around the use of the blockchain technologies in the government, and also just we are looking forward for tax payments in using the blockchain technologies, and also potentially crypto assets. We are in this initial phase, but we are advancing progressively towards this direction, because we know that, for example, in Switzerland, they are already using these solutions, and they are very well advanced also in the in this crypto asset services field. And yes, we are also advancing the law on the possibility to license crypto asset service providers, MiCA, and of course the DORA digital resilience regulation. And yes, we are saying that this journey is, let's say, very long. It's very intensive, but I think that the most benefits which come from this sometimes not easy journey is coming towards the people, towards more accessibility of the payments, fast, easy payments for the general society, for people, and also for the corporate entities. It is one of the, as I should say, public benefits that have to be understood as defined. That the more advanced systems you are using, the more convenience have to be brought to the general society. So I will stop.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tina. Really interesting to hear what's going on in Latvia, and very interesting that you said, if I heard correctly, 87% of your government disbursements are now digital. So it'll be interesting to hear how you've got over the resistance, or maybe that wasn't there, unlike Antonio, maybe, who's having resistance maybe to do the payments, many of the payments in a digital form. But are you saying a lot of what you're doing in Latvia is being driven by EU policy, so that's helping to drive kind of progress, especially, as you say, to help get the most vulnerable, including the elderly, refugees, into the banking system, picking up on the point Mark made that this can help build financial inclusion more generally, some of the technologies. And then interesting to hear about some of the things you're actually doing in Latvia. So the instant payments, very quick out to people, literally in kind of seconds, minutes, if not seconds. People using mobile technology, so being able to request support through mobile links. And then you mentioned, which is definitely taking me out of my comfort zone here on the technology side, but mentioning kind of blockchain and crypto assets as a possible way forward, but saying that this is very much a journey that you are on, but ultimately these things could really help improve the efficiency and effectiveness of these systems for your citizens and for businesses that need that support. Thank you so much, Dina. Really interesting to hear that perspective from Latvia. And then Katal, we are coming over to you. And before we do, just to say thank you, we already have questions coming in, but please do keep those coming in from the audience because I will be coming over to questions very soon. Katal, over to you.
Okay. Excuse me. Thanks for having me, first of all. So let me first say that unlike the other panelists, I don't work directly on digital payments, and I'm definitely not an expert on technology. But at the same time, digital payments and digital transformation more broadly are areas of particular interest for ODI, both in terms of their potential for promoting things that matter for the world's poorest, like better public services and financial inclusion, but also because they come with risks that need to be mitigated. So I work in a public finance team at ODI, and I lead our digital public finance hub. And I see digital payments as very important for, firstly, whether or not governments can deliver on the policies that they currently have in their budgets. And secondly, whether or not they can formulate new policies in response to emerging problems. And in particular here, I'm thinking about responding to shocks, particularly related to climate change. So I'm going to try to provide a public finance perspective broadly along the lines of, firstly, why I think this conversation around digital payments is particularly exciting for public finance management. Secondly, where it gives me some pause for concern. And finally, on what I think needs to be kept in mind when thinking about this with respect to some of the most vulnerable groups in the world, those who are in lower income countries. So firstly, why I think this conversation around digital payments is particularly exciting. So I think what we learned from COVID was that governments could use digital payments to respond to a crisis at speed and scale. And I think that came across in Antonio's comments and description. But what we also learned was that these responses could have been better targeted. And since then, a global agenda has emerged around what's been called digital public infrastructure, or DPI. And this is focused in particular on DPI for identity, for payments and data exchange, and making these interoperable with other systems. And that's exciting from and actually some of the most prominent examples of DPI for payments are actually coming from emerging markets, like UPI in India or Pix in Brazil. And this is exciting from a public finance perspective because it offers the potential for greater efficiency, not only in terms of making payments more responsive, but also using the data to make them more targeted. And it also creates incentives for formalization, which in the longer term, I think can lead to more revenue for governments. And there are broader potential benefits as well around increasing financial inclusion and empowerment. Receiving a payment from government is often the first step towards financial inclusion in lower income countries. And this can be really important for allowing vulnerable groups to start receiving other sources of income that they might have had trouble accessing otherwise. And in particular, I'm thinking about remittances. Remittances from a broader, bigger source of development finance than aid flows for many countries. But they could be even bigger if the associated transaction costs weren't so high. Now, what gives me some pause for concern? So 3 things worry me in particular. Firstly, these capabilities are not necessarily neutral. And there are some concerns emerging that governments are using them or will use them to provide short-run benefits for political reasons at the cost of producing public goods that are more important for long-term growth. Second, these capabilities can also easily exclude certain groups. My colleague, Christy Lowe, has previously pointed out from her research and the research of others that there's an overlap often between the most vulnerable groups and lack of access to digital devices and the internet. these vulnerable groups are also the most likely to not appear in a national database for a digital ID or in other social registries. These groups often lack digital literacy and have to rely on gatekeepers, and we've seen instances of those gatekeepers taking advantage. And also these systems are not infallible. Mistakes are actually common, and recipients often need to be able to talk to a real person to rectify those mistakes. And finally, I worry about government spending money on technology and technology firms wastefully. One of the most important lessons from successful benefit schemes that responded well to the pressures of COVID was that governments should fund multidisciplinary teams that bring policy and operational expertise together by focusing on the needs of actual users, rather than funding technology projects in different silos across government. That's a lesson that needs to be better understood in governments and by politicians. So that brings me to what I think needs to be kept in mind when thinking about some of the most vulnerable groups in lower income countries. So these economies are characterized by low levels of tax to GDP, large informal sectors, and low levels of social protection coverage. That means that there's not good data for targeting vulnerable people in normal times, let alone in times of crisis like natural disasters that can affect certain groups of population more than others. In some cases, it may be more appropriate to use more traditional systems for targeting, such as transferring funds to lower levels of local government and developing systems of accountability for their disbursement amongst local populations, because they have better information on who the most vulnerable groups are in their community. Having said that, countries like Togo have shown great innovation in terms of what can be done when you bring together data from different sources across government, along with technologies like mobile money. In other cases, it may be more prudent to target vulnerable groups through health and education systems, which are areas where lower income countries do actually spend larger proportions of their budget compared to social protection. And there's still a lot to be done to ensure that information and payments flow more efficiently within these public service systems. But a lot actually has been done to improve the way funds flow to these service delivery units, whether they be schools or health facilities. In particular, governments have developed capabilities to transfer money directly from the central treasury to these facilities, though this does raise some concerns about kind of cutting out lower levels of local government who actually have the mandate for overseeing service delivery at the local level. It has also been suggested that these facilities could be given pre-programmed cards so that they could have better access and more autonomy with respect to their operational budgets, to allow them to be more flexible and responsive to the needs of the communities they serve. However, facilities in rural areas in particular, there may be limits to how useful these cards would be, or if indeed they would be useful at all. And finally, and this is my last point, I don't think we should be trying to tie this discussion too tightly to formalization and domestic revenue mobilization. Rather, that should be more of a long-term goal. Ultimately, people are more willing to pay taxes when they receive quality public services, and giving people the impression that this is about bringing them into the tax net is likely to backfire, I think. So thanks again for the opportunity, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Ghetal. So some of the things that you mentioned there, I think as well, building on what others have said, so how digital technology, especially during COVID, demonstrated how it could be used in a way that gives a very quick response out. But you're saying, you know, also thinking about how kind of resilient are some of these systems to future shocks as well, and are we thinking about that? You introduced the terminology there, DPI, the digital public infrastructure, and mentioned that some of the emerging markets in particular, you mentioned India and others, have been very good at kind of building this and using that to get support out to huge numbers of vulnerable citizens quite successfully. you mentioned some of the concerns there. I think bringing into the conversation some of the concerns around some of the potential ways forward. So maybe governments using some of these citizens for short-term political reasons, you said. Definitely the issue around digital exclusion. We can come on to that in the questions. I think that comes up in a lot of our webinars, that actually if we move too far and remove choice and only provide digital kind of solutions, then some people are going to not be able to access some of those solutions for the reasons that you set out there. And also some of the concerns you said about procurement. Does government actually understand enough about the way it is buying in some of these technology solutions to do that in the most efficient way? And should they be bringing in kind of multidisciplinary teams to work on this and make sure the user is at the heart of these solutions? And then also you picked up, I think, on what our other speakers have said, the importance of communication with some of the vulnerable communities, raising awareness, but also making sure that the right solutions are given to the right people to make sure that we have the best solutions for everybody. Thank you very much, all of you. We've got lots of questions coming in, so you definitely piqued everybody's interest in the audience. I'm actually going to go straight over to some of our questions because Dennis has sent in quite a few, and I think the first few, Mark, were directed at you following your presentation, but I'm going to broaden that out because I think they're relevant for lots of our speakers. So I'm going to take the second one here because Dennis has said that, Mark, you touched on in your presentation the need for scalable payment infrastructure, and you touched on security concerns as well. So can you elaborate on the specific technologies or strategies that are being implemented to ensure both scalability and security? And I want to ask all of you about security of digital systems, because I think this issue of are digital systems secure is so important, because that's going to build trust in citizens who maybe want to use these systems. And maybe, Antonio, I'm going to come to you first. That might be some of the resistance around people moving to digital systems because they're worried about the security of their data. So I'm going to come over to all of you and ask you your thoughts on scalability and security. But Antonio, I'll start with you first.
Great, very interesting what the rest of the speakers have said. I definitely tuned in with a lot of the issues that they pointed out. On this particular aspect, I think the security or resistance that some people have had to switch over to digital payments is not so much as the use of their personal data, but rather the fact of having their cash in a digital form and having perhaps some issue, or their phone doesn't work, or something was wrong with the app, or somebody stole their cell phone and they need to change it and transfer. I think that's one of the things that scares people the most, because many of these vulnerable homes, this monetary transfer is the first payment that they receive in the month, is a most, all months, the same day, the same amount. So that they're really counting on that cash transfer. And the perhaps being a bit scared that there might be some issue on the system really gets them worried with that. And also the other side of this is some supply side restrictions, because you might not have an enterprise nearby that accepts a digital payment, or some services in the informal market, perhaps childcare that you pay with cash, and you need to have that with you. So I think on that side, that's something that we need to continue working on. And as Cathal said, sometimes there's an issue and the beneficiary needs to talk directly to a person to resolve it, and not a phone number that you dial the answers on your phone. I think that needs to be really taken into account to provide a really good service, and for people to feel that they're being accompanied in this process and not just manage yourself. I think that would be one of the things I would point out.
Thanks, Antonio. So the resistance is more about they want the real cash in their hands, so they know they've got it and they're not going to have problems spending it, whereas they're slightly worried that the digital system might not work. But Mark, I'm going to come back to you then on the security point. And I want to add to that another question that Dennis sent in, because I really like this, which was around the kind of, if the system is really secure, how do you balance kind of privacy concerns as well? So in this
Yeah.
kind of thing, and if you're getting insights from a lot of these systems, you're obviously getting information about people. So how do you balance those kind of concerns as well?
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of things about cash, because I thought that would come up quite a lot. Obviously on cards, governments are choosing in some cases to actually block a recipient's ability to withdraw cash. You can also choose to say you can only take a certain amount of the disbursement cash. So you could choose 50% or whatever, or you could have no controls. The point for us, though, is that it's down to the government and their policy to choose what controls they implement. It's not up to us, obviously. In terms of security, there's a few things I would say. With my background, you'd expect me to say that cloud is an enabling technology because it's highly secure. The big public cloud companies give you huge reach and scale, and a lot of that cyber defense that is against cyber attacks. We have our own security operations centers around the world in Visa to protect our own systems and networks from cyber attack. Now that's different to benefit fraud. We're just protecting the systems from being compromised, of course. So that's the first thing I would say. Then within the actual payment systems themselves, we employ a technology called tokenization. So digital credentials, you all know the card number you see on the bit of plastic. Well, it's essentially kind of scrambling that and putting it in an encryption code that no one can get to. And there's billions and billions of these that we've issued now in the world. So that's the first level of security device that we use for digital disbursements. There's also a lot of work that we're doing, and you'll expect to see some announcements from us in the future around biometric identification. This also, I mentioned that carefully because this sort of comes back to the point that you raised about GDPR and personal data. It's because you've got to be careful about that. Obviously, the financial services industry in Europe has implemented two-factor identification a while ago. So you try and pay for something, or you get money and then you get a text or something or an email and you have to confirm. That is also part of the security structure of our disbursements. But I can see this technology as it's evolving, moving into a new area of biometrics quite quickly now. And that's aligned to the application of AI, which is everyone's favorite topic. But AI essentially gives you the tools to leverage huge volumes of data for the benefit of either the citizen or the government agency and whatever you're trying to do here. It's fair to say that we always comply with all rules of compliance with data privacy, GDPR. We always aggregate all data. We never have access to anything. It's in the core design of Visa systems that we never have individual data.
Yeah.
The systems, however, that governments might use for disbursements are often provided by our partners, smaller companies, SMBs, for example. They're more agile, perhaps in some cases, than the bigger financial institutions, and provide platforms to governments for managing this. And it's really down to the government and their supplier for how they do that. We give a lot of advice on how to secure people's data and how to encrypt it and how to anonymize it. But at the end of the day, a government agency needs to be able to give money digitally or otherwise to an individual recipient, so you need to know the details. But in between, they are essentially encrypted.
Thanks, Mark. And Dina, I will change the order after this, but Dina, I'm going to come to you. The same thoughts on security, but there's been a specific question to you, which I think leads on from it very nicely, which is, you mentioned the adoption of open banking. How do you see this impacting payment systems in terms of fraud prevention and transparency? And so I want to mention that, but you also mentioned the use of blockchain. Is that for security reasons? Because that's a very secure system as well. So generally, your thoughts on security issues.
Well, I think that open banking will open even more possibilities for developing of different solutions from the banking systems. It will give, let's say, impetus for even more competition in the payments area. It will allow all kinds of information service providers, payment account information management companies, and API solution providers will give access to information on clients. That means that even more competitive pressure will be brought to the system, and with this open banking is bringing us opportunities, but also there have to be the solutions on the security of payments fund. And with this, requirements of DORA will be applicable also to payment service providers, to payment information service providers, and also to the banks. And with this and resilience plans, it will be even more expanded further. And I see that there is also an issue and the question about the possibility of the improvement of the government systems vis-a-vis these private solutions. I think with open banking, even more pressure to government systems to become increasingly efficient, to process the payments in a very short time. It will be even more increased. And of course, open banking, I hope, will solve this all the issues around this this fraud prevention, which was not possible with introduction of the PSD2 and strong customer authentication. In this reality, I think we have to strike the balance between the fraud and the security of payments. I think even more have to be invested in this security. This will of course be a requirement. Also for the not disclosing the data of the customers, and of course the open banking will prevent more fraud, because there will be a particular consent from the customer that he is accepting the use of their data and the sharing of its data. This will definitely somehow will bring even more one layer of the security to the system. This is how we see this.
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, that's an interesting point, that I think people will have to consent to their data being used in that way, but in return, they're going to get a very good service. So I think that will be interesting. Ketal, you can talk on that, but we've got so many questions coming in. By all means, if you've got something to say on the security issue, but I do have another question to put to you.
Maybe not on, well, I can be very brief on the security because it's not my area, but on the question of scalability, you know, I think Dina mentioned open banking, and like in the UK here, for example, we don't have a conversation around digital public infrastructure for payments, for example. It's like it's not going to come up in the newspaper or anything. Open banking has essentially taken care of that issue. But when you go to lower income countries, the incentives for banks to cover more of the population down the income scale start to disappear. And if you think about it geographically, the incentives of banks to cover population outside of urban centers start to disappear. And that's why, and these are exactly the groups that they want to target with these payments. So you can see why there is a conversation going on about, you know, public involvement in this digital infrastructure in countries like India, in countries like Brazil with UPI and PIX. On security, all I would say is that I suspect that governments will need to rely quite a lot on the private sector, but that doesn't mean that they outsource it to the private sector. They still need in-house capabilities that have expertise in this area so that they know what they're buying.
Yeah, thanks, Ketal. I am going to pick up now on there's loads of questions coming in because the webinar is very focused on getting money out to the most vulnerable. We've got lots of questions about the vulnerable groups that we are talking about. So I'm going to get two questions together. So Camilo Teles, she's from the United Nations Better Than Cash Alliance, and she has said, COVID showed how we can deliver aid to those who need it most. How can we learn lessons from that so that people like Visa, organizations like Visa, can work with governments around the world on things like universal basic income, for example? So the basic question I would like to put to all of you is, how can we capture those lessons? You said, Antonio, we keep reverting back to old ways. How can we make sure we learn some of the lessons from COVID in reaching the most vulnerable? And I really like this question from Lai Ying Lo from Singapore. How does your country issue government payment to vulnerable groups such as recipients who no longer have mental capacity? So maybe people with dementia or other mental health issues. How does that work? Do you need to have a valid court order, for example, or can the payments be made to designated caregivers if they have a legal responsibility? How would that work in a digital system? Does anybody have any examples of that, for example? So I will go to Katal first on this one. So your thoughts on kind of really getting to the most vulnerable, and what lessons did we learn from COVID?
You know, I think COVID showed us more about, you know, like being responsive and less about being targeted. I think it showed that there isn't enough data, particularly in lower income countries, to target the most vulnerable. Some countries obviously perform better than others. I mentioned Togo, who were extremely innovative in terms of the data that they used and the approach that they took. But I think the lesson is that there's a lot more to be done around kind of infrastructure for data exchange.
Thanks. Dina, your thoughts on kind of how do we actually reach the most vulnerable?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have solutions for caregivers, and they have just to have this power or attorney to receive the benefits or the pensions, and actually the current payment service providers are actually recognizing the power of attorney because they have availability of the register of these. The register of the persons who are designated by the others to receive the payments on their behalf. In that sense, I think that the system is working quite well. But in case that you do not have the bank account, for example, you can also use our, let's say, state postal system because they are also licensed payment service providers, just to receive this payment in cash. You can order the service in-house, and the post officer will come to your home and bring your benefit payment or pension payment directly to the home. If you have some kind of a disability, you cannot go to the ATM, or you cannot go to the bank or the payment service provider. This is also one of the solutions, but of course the majority is preferring the traditional digital format. These are more exceptional cases when you can access your benefit payments or the pensions in cash.
Thanks, Dina. Mark, do you have any examples kind of where Visa is helping to really reach the most vulnerable?
I have one that comes to mind, particularly as the question asks about people who may not have their complete mental capacity. We've worked with an entity in the Netherlands called NBBI. You can look it up online. They are a group of legal guardians, essentially, appointed by the court in Netherlands for individuals who are considered in the eyes of the law to be incapable of independently managing their finances and require support and ongoing care to get them on a path to do so. And there's many reasons why that could be the case. It could be an accumulation of debt, addiction, or indeed lack of mental capacity. And it's managed by this Association of Guardians and Income Managers called NBBI. And they assist the individuals by taking control of their finances and managing their affairs, as they've been appointed by the court, until they can be considered financially competent. It's a not-for-profit entity, so it's not actually a government agency per se, but it's a not-for-profit appointed by the court. And they look to kind of support guardians and the financially vulnerable in their care by giving them payment tools, in this case, a Visa card, but a platform as well. It's not just a card. They have a platform to manage it, control it. There's training as well, and a network to support them and give them the freedom, but also to see, control that. So it is a court-appointed process. Yeah. So that's my example.
Thanks, Mark. That's great to have that real case study there. Antonio, your thoughts on what have you done in Uruguay to really try and broaden access and reach the most vulnerable?
Right. Well, I think on the lessons learned, it's definitely important to have after the whole pandemic and the whole craziness that was going around, taking a time to evaluate and see what worked, what didn't work. We did some focus groups, we did qualitative evaluations, and try to understand, to take out lessons from all this. And we definitely learned, for example, the whole issue. I don't know if it's similar in other parts of the world, but over here, low-income households, usually they don't have a specific contract for a phone number. They buy chips and they use that number, and when that's over, they buy another chip. So they're constantly changing phone numbers, and that was quite a difficulty when we first rolled out the digital wallet, because it was associated to a phone number. And since they kept changing it, we had to establish a procedure to changing that wallet very quickly. That was one of the things. The other issue that we found was the process of having a digital ID. During the pandemic, you would enter your ID and some information that you have on the government ID, and we would validate your identity with that and use government data to define if you were in or out. But looking forward to expand this, we wanted to upgrade the security of that access point. And we found that the process of getting your digital ID was not very helpful for even mostly for low income households. There was a physical part of the process where you had to go to an office, which doesn't make much sense. The idea would be to, like, with biometrics or something, have the digital ID from your house.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. And definitely the use of government data to target really well the households. And finally, work a lot with incentives to make people pass on to the digital payments, because we definitely agree that our main mandate from the president was the freedom of choice. I mean, if forcing people to digital payment, just letting them choose. And for that, we had to bring out certain incentives. And one of them was what I mentioned earlier, the exoneration of the value-added tax on all the purchases. And also, we spoke a bit about banking and financial inclusion. I think this is another incentive where several banks do not include these lower income households. And with a digital mobile app, you can give them all the benefits of financial inclusion without being banked. And they have an associated sub account within the mobile app where they can receive money, transfer money, and not being with an official bank. So I think that's something to work on, the challenges of the operational aspects, and on the incentive side to get people to choose to go digital.
Thanks, Antonio. We have still got loads of questions to answer, and we have only got 10 minutes left. So what I'm going to start doing is asking different people to answer different questions. And if you really want to come in, please do raise your hand and I will bring you in. But again, I'm going to bring two questions together. So Vikas has said, and this is about the digital exclusion point. How do vulnerable customers who do not speak local language, struggle with digital skills, have no access to smartphones or computers, catch up with this highly digitalized process? And I'm going to partner that with the question from Kynan Stott, who has said, both Mark and Catal have acknowledged that vulnerable are often unbanked, so don't have digital capacity, but we're also in a world of diminishing physical bank and ATM networks, so their access to cash is getting harder. So what do people do in this world where we are trying to nudge people to digital and it's harder to get access to cash? Who would like to answer that question? That's a tricky question.
I can.
Antonio, you're smiling, so I'm going to come to you and then Catal.
No, really quickly, it is a great question because indeed the cash withdrawals places over here are reducing. What I think we need to do is really push for more commerces and enterprises to taking digital payments as well, making it cheaper for them to and lowering the transaction costs that sometimes are involved within digital payments or cards or everything. And but definitely that is an interesting point on how do you make sure that the most vulnerable are not left out in this collision of worlds. But if you give the right incentives to these shops, and when we did a great work on that, even in the most remote places, they have a point of sale for cards, and that can be transformed to receive digital payments with a cell phone. Anybody with a cell phone can receive a digital payment. So I think we need to work on the incentives of that and make sure nobody's left out.
Thanks, Antonio. Catal, did you want to come in on this one?
So, I mean, on the first question of how do we vulnerable customers who do not, how do we keep them, catch them up? We don't. We just don't. You provide it through whatever needs to be provided, face-to-face kiosks and things like that. I think in terms of giving people a cash substitute, like the wallet described, if it's going to be a cash substitute, they need to be free to use it in the way that they used cash. And some of the reasons why they're not using cash is because they want to stay in the informal economy. They're not ready to leave it. So if they have the sense at all that this is going to be used by the tax authorities to audit them, then I don't think they're going to use it.
Okay, and that's obviously a tricky conversation for government because they want to bring people into the formal kind of environment. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This is we've got so many great questions coming in. So Russell Hodge from America, from the USA, has said, based on your experience, what are some incentives that do work to encourage people to take up digital payments instead of cash? Dina, you're nodding, so you've done brilliantly. And then Mark, I'll come to you. Dina, what are some of the incentives that do work?
Yes, I would like to say that the one and the most important motivator for taking the digital payment is the ease of the using digital payment. That digital payments are accepted, and of course the cost of the making the digital payments, because our success was partly due to the fact that the digital payment is not bringing more cost to the customer than the ordinary payment, and even more because the cash management is let's say more costly, but we have to make the digital payments more available to everyone. For example, if we are speaking about the instant payments, there was a agreement that the the banking system is not accepting the higher fees for transferring of the funds in the mode of the instant payments than the ordinary payment. And then it came naturally that most of the people were starting to use the instant payments. So you have to motivate it with reduced cost and the ease of the using of this digital form.
Thanks, Dina. And interesting, Antonio, you said you've tried the financial incentives and that's not necessarily working enough. But Mark, you wanted to come in on this.
First of all, I would say speed and convenience. Recipient doesn't have to go to the welfare office and queue up, obviously. But also, and I think this is something a lot of people don't think about, is communication. A government agency can then communicate to the recipient. For example, it could send a message to say your payment is due in 2 days. Whereas obviously without any digital channel, you can't communicate with the recipient.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. This is I want you guys to reassure one of our one of our audience members who's coming. Let me just see if I can grab this. Yes, so this is Hamish Farah, who is from Ethiopia, and Hamis has said, can we ensure that digital payment companies or kind of people are not just printing new money into the system? So can you create a digital account, for example? So he's saying, good example for my country now is that I think homeless people, so he's saying Bailey, but homeless people are printing digital accounts to receive charity from the community because the community has gone essentially cashless. So I want to kind of slightly rephrase the question in that, is it easier to, because digital money isn't maybe seen as real money, so is it easier to scam the system, to fraud the system on a digital system, or do you think a digital system is actually more secure than a cash system? I will phrase the question in that way. Who would like to come in on this one? Katal, you've unmuted yourself. I'm going to do that as a sign.
I think I was unmuted already. I think Hamis is in Somaliland, which is one of the countries that does receive a lot of remittances. I don't have an answer to.
I think actually there might be a line in here that's helpful. Kamish has said the government has no control on the amount of digital currency in existence. Is that true or not?
I mean, I don't know. Okay. That's a question of central bank regulation.
Dina, you might be the person to ask on this. So just because it's not cash, you can control it, can't you?
I don't think that it is a notion about the control, because both payments, for example, if you are speaking about the euro payments, whether it's in the cash or whether it's in the digital format, it's still the euro. So it doesn't matter whether it's a cash format or a digital format. I don't think that the main idea behind this is to have any kind of control, because it's a freedom of the customer to choose any means of payment. And if we are speaking, for example, about the euro cash, there is also one regulation which is coming to force soon. It's a legal tender of the euro cash. That means that you have to accept also the cash payments in euro. Yeah. I don't think that this is at all about the control.
So I think the issue is that regulation will cover digital and cash systems. So
exactly, yes.
Yeah. Fine. So I've got last two questions, and Mark, there's one specifically for you, and then I'm going to ask another one which anyone can answer, and you have to keep it really short because we're in our last couple of minutes. So Mark, I just want your thoughts. Again, it was a question from Dennis on, you highlighted the use of kind of data. So if you're using virtual cards, it can give government and yourselves a huge amount of data that can be helpful in policy development. You mentioned asylum seekers, I think. So Dennis has said, could you just ask a little bit more about how some of those insights and data can be used by government? So have you got any thoughts on that? And the other question I wanted to ask, everyone can answer this if you want to. This has come from Pule Morake, I think, who has said, do you factor age and location as a challenge to reaching beneficiaries? So is that one of the issues about reaching the most vulnerable, their age and where they are located? Is that a challenge? Mark, any thoughts on insights and data as
On
your
data, so first of all, it gives you insights into an understanding of the recipient's needs, what they're spending it on. With a card, you get category codes. Are they spending at a supermarket on fuel or on the train fare or whatever? So you get some insight into the needs, and you can therefore potentially target help and think about policy going forwards in a way that reflects these needs. You also get data like how quickly are they spending it? Are they literally running down to the cash point or supermarket to get cash back as soon as they get top up? So all of this data gives you insights on to inform your policies going forwards, and you can make decisions about how you disperse funds.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And then I'm going to go Cathal, Dina, and then Antonio. Any thoughts on age and or location as kind of a challenge in terms of getting money out? Cathal, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think Pula there has highlighted two big challenges. It's come up in some of the other questions as well, that digital literacy, it's a little bit more difficult for elderly populations, and as well kind of on location, there's less incentives for the banking system the more you go from urban to rural.
Thanks, Cathal. Dina, your thoughts on some of those challenges?
Yes, definitely. I think if we are speaking about the age of the people, this is definitely one of the challenges, because you have to dedicate special staff just to have the digital skills of the elderly people in place for them to understand how to make these digital payments. It is one of the factors which have to be brought in mind, and especially if we are speaking about the vulnerability of the elderly people. They have to be taken with a specific, let's say, care, and maybe also targeted with different kind of informative materials, or dedicated personnel just to speak about how to make the payment in the digital form.
Coming back to that, making sure nobody's excluded.
Exactly, yes. And if we are speaking about, for example, availability of the cash in rural areas, there have to be also some step in of the government policy, just not to make this distance a factor which can exclude the very distant regions from availability of the public services, or even getting the cash. There definitely have to be some agreement with the private sector, either it is in the regulation form or in memorandum of understanding that says that you have to sustain some kind of some part of the services in these rural areas as well. And I know that in Europe there are a lot of solutions. There are a lot of innovative solutions. For example, in Spain they have specific mobile banking banking branches which are targeted and moving around in these most distant areas. So you have to understand that this have to be solved as a complex issue.
Thanks, Dina. Antonio, the last 20 seconds go to you.
Very quickly, just I totally agree with what Cathal and Dina just said right now. Definitely on terms of the location, you really need to make sure that on the supply side, the beneficiary has somewhere to spend that digital cash. If commerces around the area don't accept it, then that will never work. And just a tiny comment in regards to age, beyond the fact that of course the elderly might have more difficulties, there's also at least culturally over here, the really elderly people that take their time. They have a specific day where they go and get the cash from the welfare office or the bank, and that's like a key moment in their month.
Social moment as well.
It
Yeah.
is, and they go, they talk to the person, and even when we had the opportunity to send their pension directly to their bank accounts, which many people had, they still chose to go to the welfare office or to the bank to talk to the person. Just a little cultural insight on that, being a human connection is also very important in these things. Just that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Antonio. It's great to end on that note, I think, which is, as we talk about technology and digital solutions, we can't forget the human in the middle of all of this and make sure we get the balance right going forward. Thank you so much to all of you. That went so quickly. I can't believe we are out of time. Thank you to the great audience for sending in so many questions. There are a few from Dennis that we didn't manage to get to, mainly on the technology side. Dennis, we will try and answer those for you behind the scenes. So don't worry, we will make sure we get answers out to everything. To the great audience, we've sent you a short questionnaire. If you wouldn't mind spending just a couple of minutes to fill in that questionnaire, that would be, I'm hugely grateful for that. It means we can keep giving you exactly the type of webinars that are most useful for you. Thank you so much to our brilliant panel. So to Mark, to Dina, to Antonio, and to Catal, you got through so many questions there, so many answers. Thank you so much for lending so much of your time and your expertise. Thanks again to Visa for being our knowledge partner. We will be sending around a link to everybody who registered, everybody who was on live today with this video. So a link to the video so you can watch it all again or share it with your colleagues who weren't able to attend. And we will also be producing a write-up with the key messages, key points that came out of today's discussion, and that we will share with you in a week or so's time. Just leaves me to say a huge thank you again and goodbye from me. Thanks to the panel, and hope to see you all again very soon on another one of our webinars. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.